In early February 2025, trade tensions between the United States and Canada escalated following President Donald Trump's announcement of significant tariffs. Citing concerns over illegal immigration and the influx of fentanyl into the U.S., Trump declared a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports, with a reduced 10% tariff specifically on Canadian energy products. These measures were set to take effect on February 4, 2025. In response, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced retaliatory tariffs, imposing a 25% duty on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods starting February 4, with plans to extend these tariffs to an additional $125 billion of U.S. goods after a 21-day public consultation. The targeted products include American beer, wine, bourbon, fruits, fruit juices, clothing, sports equipment, and household appliances. Following discussions between Trump and Trudeau, an agreement was reached to delay the implementation of these tariffs for 30 days. Canada committed to enhancing border security measures, including appointing a fentanyl czar and collaborating on a joint strike force with the U.S. to combat drug trafficking. These concessions, some of which had been previously announced, led to mixed reactions within Canada. Despite the temporary pause, concerns persist about the potential economic impact of the proposed tariffs. Economists warn that such measures could increase consumer prices, disrupt supply chains, and strain the long-standing trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada. The situation remains fluid, with both nations engaging in negotiations to find a more permanent resolution before the new deadline. Recent developments indicate that Canada is adjusting its oil export strategies in response to evolving trade dynamics with the United States and increasing demand from Asian markets, particularly China. Canada's oil industry, and specifically Canadian pipeline operator Trans Mountain, anticipates increased interest in its pipeline system, especially if these U.S. tariffs are implemented. The Trans Mountain pipeline, which can transport up to 890,000 barrels per day from Alberta to Canada's Pacific coast, has been operating at approximately 80% capacity. The company expects that the tariffs will lead to a rise in shipments to Asia, particularly China, as exporters seek alternative markets. The Trans Mountain pipeline expansion, which began operations in May 2024, has tripled the flow of crude oil from Alberta to Canada's Pacific coast, reaching a capacity of 890,000 barrels per day. This expansion provides Canadian producers with greater access to Asian markets, reducing reliance on the U.S. In recent months, major refiners in China, Japan, South Korea, and Brunei have purchased cargoes from the expanded pipeline. For instance, in September 2024, Chinese private refiner Rangang Prochemical secured multiple cargoes of Canadian crude. Canada's strategic pivot towards Asia is driven by several factors: market diversification, reducing dependence on the U.S. market, and mitigating risks associated with trade disputes and tariff impositions. Asian countries, particularly China, have a growing demand for heavy crude oil, which aligns well with Canada's export offerings. The economic benefits of accessing high-demand markets in Asia present opportunities for Canadian producers to achieve better pricing and expand their customer base. Despite Canada's efforts to position itself as a leader in climate action, including implementing a nationwide carbon tax, the country continues to invest heavily in oil extraction projects. The Trans Mountain pipeline has become emblematic of this contradiction, as it facilitates increased oil exports to global markets, particularly China. Critics argue that such investments undermine Canada's emissions reduction targets and highlight the challenges of balancing economic growth with environmental commitments. Canada is a significant player in the global oil industry, ranking among the top oil-producing nations worldwide. As of 2023, the top oil-producing countries and their approximate daily production figures are as follows: the United States 12.91 million barrels per day, which is 22% of global production. Saudi Arabia 11.13 million barrels per day, which is 11%. Russia 10.75 million barrels per day, which is also 11%. Canada 5.76 million barrels per day, which is 6%. and China 5.26 million barrels per day, which makes up 5%. Collectively, these top 5 countries account for over half of the world's total oil production. Canada's oil production has seen significant growth over the past decades. In 2019, the country produced an average of 4.7 million barrels per day, with 64% derived from unconventional oil sands. By 2023, production increased to approximately 5.76 million barrels per day, solidifying Canada's position as the 4th largest oil producer globally. Canada boasts the 3rd largest proven oil reserves worldwide, estimated at approximately 180 billion barrels, primarily located in Alberta's oil sands. This vast reserve base underpins Canada's significant role in the global energy landscape. A substantial portion of Canada's oil production is destined for export. In 2023, crude oil exports reached a record high of 4 million barrels per day, accounting for 81% of the country's total production. Notably, 98% of these exports were directed to the United States, highlighting the integrated nature of the North American energy market. Canada's export economy is diverse, encompassing a range of industries that contribute significantly to its GDP. Building upon the previously mentioned key export commodities, here are additional details: mineral fuels and oils. In 2023, Canada's exports in this category were valued at approximately $43.4 billion, a significant portion of the country's export revenue. This category includes crude oil, petroleum gas, and refined petroleum products, with the United States remaining the primary destination. Vehicles. The automotive sector is a major contributor to Canada's exports, with vehicles accounting for about $63.6 billion in export revenue in 2023. This includes passenger cars, SUVs, and light trucks, with a majority manufactured in Ontario and Quebec and exported to the United States. Machinery, including nuclear reactors and boilers. Machinery exports, which encompass a wide range of industrial and technological equipment, contributed approximately $16.01 billion in 2023. Key export destinations include the United States and Mexico, facilitated by trade agreements such as the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA. Canada and China have also developed a significant trade relationship over the past few decades, with China emerging as Canada's 2nd largest trading partner after the United States. In 2022, bilateral trade between Canada and China reached substantial figures. Canada exported goods worth approximately $25.4 billion to China, while imports from China stood at about $62.1 billion, resulting in a trade deficit of $36.7 billion for Canada. In 2023, Canada's exports to China were valued at approximately $26 billion, with key commodities contributing significantly to this trade. Here's a detailed breakdown of these primary export categories: oil, seeds, and oleaginous fruits, $3.84 billion. This category, dominated by canola, experienced a remarkable growth rate of 75.21% year-over-year. The surge can be attributed to increased demand following the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions in China and the normalization of market access for Canadian producers. Notably, in the first quarter of 2023, canola exports reached $1.27 billion, marking a 331.65% increase compared to the same period in the previous year. Ores, slag, and ash, $3.58 billion. This segment includes various metal ores, with iron and copper being significant contributors. Iron ore exports to China totaled $2.5 billion, reflecting a 15.58% year-over-year growth, while copper exports amounted to $1.6 billion, representing a 13.57% increase. Mineral fuels and oils, $2.40 billion. Coal is a primary component of this category. In 2023, Canadian coal exports to China were valued at $3.04 billion, though this represented a 12.93% decline from the previous year, partly due to China's renewed coal trade with Australia, which intensified competition. Pulp of wood and related materials, $2.30 billion. Chemical wood pulp exports reached $2.21 billion in 2023, experiencing a modest growth of 1.98% year-over-year. This steady demand underscores China's need for raw materials in its paper and packaging industries. Cereals, $1.49 billion. Cereals, including wheat and barley, have seen increased exports to China, driven by evolving food consumption patterns and the need to supplement domestic production. Between 2019 and 2023, cereal exports from Canada to China grew at an annual rate of 19%. In 2022, Canada's imports from China reached a record high of approximately 100 billion Canadian dollars, marking a 16% increase from the previous year. This surge underscores the deepening economic ties between the two nations. The primary import categories from China included consumer goods, valued at 31 billion Canadian dollars, covering a broad spectrum of products such as household items, clothing, and personal care products, and electronics, which were worth 28 billion Canadian dollars. These figures illustrate the significant role that consumer goods and electronics play in Canada's import portfolio from China, reflecting the strong demand for these products in the Canadian market. For those who may not be aware of the reasons behind these strategic moves and the growing tensions between Canada and the United States, here is some background information. In December 2024, at a meeting held at Mar-a-Lago with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, then President-elect Donald Trump proposed that if impending U.S. tariffs harmed Canada's economy, the nation might consider joining as the 51st state of the United States. He even dubbed Trudeau Governor Justin Trudeau of the great state of Canada and expressed eagerness to continue talks regarding tariffs and trade in early 2025. Disagreements between Canada and the United States intensified after a sequence of statements and policy suggestions from President Donald Trump. Central to the debate were Trump's proposals that Canada should contemplate statehood as the 51st member of the U.S. and his administration's enforcement of hefty tariffs on Canadian products. During a press conference at Mar-a-Lago on January 7, 2025, when asked if Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau could offer any solution to avoid the looming tariffs, President Trump replied, "What I'd like to see is Canada become our 51st state." He further reinforced this viewpoint by posting on his social media outlet, Truth Social, stating, "We pay hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize Canada. Why? There's no reason. We don't need anything they have. We have unlimited energy, should make our own cars, and have more lumber than we can ever use without this massive subsidy. Canada ceases to exist as a viable country." Harsh but true. Therefore, Canada should become our cherished 51st state, much lower taxes and far better military protection for the people of Canada, and no tariffs. In addition to these comments, President Trump made several other statements that further strained relations between the United States and Canada. In January 2025, Trump remarked that Canada doesn't essentially have a military, they have a very small military. He also stated, "We're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect Canada." Moreover, Trump criticized Canada for its alleged prohibition on U.S. banks, asking, "What's that all about?" These statements coincided with his administration's decision to levy a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, with a reduced 10% tariff on energy exports. The U.S. government defended these tariffs as necessary measures to tackle issues like illegal immigration and drug trafficking. President Trump's claim that the United States subsidizes Canada with hundreds of billions of dollars each year has been thoroughly debunked by experts and fact-checkers alike. This assertion appears to be based on a misreading of trade deficits. In 2024, the U.S. ran a trade deficit with Canada, largely due to significant imports of Canadian oil. However, a trade deficit does not equate to a subsidy. It merely indicates that the U.S. imports more from Canada than it exports to it, reflecting market forces and consumer preferences rather than direct government financial support. The economic ties between the U.S. and Canada are profoundly interwoven and mutually advantageous. In 2023, Canada exported 77% of its goods to the United States and imported nearly half of its goods from the U.S., rendering them each other's largest trading partners. This robust trade relationship sustains millions of jobs and contributes significantly to the GDP of both countries. It is equally important to note that the U.S. reaps significant benefits from this arrangement. Canada is the largest energy supplier to the U.S., providing crude oil, natural gas, and electricity, an energy trade essential for American industries and consumers. The stark difference in population sizes between the United States and Canada also significantly shapes their trade dynamics. As of 2024, the U.S. population was approximately 303.9 million, over 8 times larger than Canada's roughly 40 million inhabitants. This immense difference results in a larger consumer base in the U.S., which in turn drives a higher demand for goods and services, including those imported from Canada. Consequently, the U.S. tends to import more from Canada than it exports, leading to a trade deficit that reflects market-size disparities rather than an act of subsidization. Former President Trump's assertion that American banks are not allowed to do business in Canada is inaccurate. In fact, numerous U.S. banks have been operating in Canada for decades under the nation's regulatory framework. Although Canada enforces strict banking regulations, these rules apply equally to both domestic and foreign institutions, ensuring the stability of the financial system. U.S. banks are allowed to operate in Canada through 2 main channels: Schedule II banks and Schedule III banks. Schedule II banks are subsidiaries of foreign banks capable of accepting deposits and offering a full range of banking services. Several prominent U.S.-based banks, including Citibank Canada, J.P. Morgan Bank Canada, and Amex Bank of Canada, operate under this category. Schedule III banks are branches of foreign banks licensed to carry out specific banking activities, mainly in corporate and investment banking. Examples include Bank of America National Association, Wells Fargo Bank National Association, and Citibank N.A. These institutions are instrumental in financing wealth management and investment banking across Canada. Recent data shows that there are 16 U.S.-based bank subsidiaries and branches in Canada, collectively holding approximately 13 billion Canadian dollars in assets. For instance, J.P. Morgan Chase, one of the largest American financial institutions, has maintained a presence in Canada for over a century, and currently employs around 600 people in major cities such as Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. While Canada's financial regulations do impose certain requirements on foreign banks, they do not bar U.S. banks from operating in the country. Instead, these standards ensure that all institutions, whether Canadian or foreign, adhere to high levels of stability and consumer protection. Finally, regarding President Trump's claim that large quantities of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl, are smuggled from Canada into the United States, Trump has used this issue as a rationale for imposing tariffs on Canadian imports. Although there is evidence of fentanyl production and trafficking within Canada, most notably in British Columbia, and Canadian law enforcement has identified cases of domestic fentanyl production, most fentanyl entering the U.S. originates from Mexico. Mexican cartels typically produce fentanyl using precursor chemicals from China and smuggle it into the U.S. through well-established routes. While some fentanyl may be trafficked internationally, including into the U.S. from Canada, comprehensive data on the total volume is scarce. Seizure data indicates that most fentanyl interdictions occur along the U.S.-Mexico border, suggesting that the northern border with Canada is a less significant pathway for fentanyl smuggling. That is all for this video. Thank you for watching. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today. If our content resonated with you or sparked inspiration, please consider expressing your support by liking and subscribing to stay connected with our community. Your support holds immense value for us. You can watch another video on our channel, which is now on the screen. Recent research from international organizations and academic institutions reinforces and deepens the understanding of the economic and geopolitical implications arising from trade tensions such as those experienced between the United States and Canada in early 2025. A 2023 report by the International Monetary Fund emphasized that the imposition of tariffs typically leads to immediate increases in consumer prices and disrupts established supply chains. The IMF noted that while tariffs may provide temporary relief to specific domestic industries, they often lead to inefficiencies by misallocating resources. The research highlighted that tariffs can force companies to reorganize their production and distribution networks, leading to longer-term shifts in global supply chains that can impact economic growth on both sides of the border. Complementing the IMF's findings, several studies published in reputable journals such as the Journal of International Economics and the Review of World Economics have shown that tariff-induced distortions not only increase production costs, but also reduce overall economic welfare. These studies argue that although tariffs might protect certain sectors in the short term, they tend to decrease market efficiency in the long run. For example, the integrated North American supply chain, deeply rooted in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, formerly NAFTA, relies on seamless cross-border cooperation. Disruptions caused by tariffs could thus lead to broader economic repercussions that extend well beyond the immediate industries affected. The Peterson Institute for International Economics has also contributed significant research in this area, noting that North American trade integration has fostered economic stability and growth over the past several decades. Their analysis shows that coordinated supply chains have enabled industries in the United States and Canada to achieve economies of scale and enhance productivity. In this context, any abrupt alteration in tariff policy risks, undermining the established mutual benefits that have been a cornerstone of North American economic success. Turning to the energy sector, research from the World Bank, published in late 2024, has documented how nations facing trade barriers in traditional markets are compelled to diversify their export destinations. This diversification strategy has been observed in Canada's proactive efforts to tap into the burgeoning energy markets of Asia, particularly in response to potential U.S. tariff impositions. The World Bank's findings indicate that diversifying export markets can help mitigate the risks associated with overdependence on a single trading partner. However, it also necessitates significant investments in infrastructure, regulatory adjustments, and market research to fully capitalize on these new opportunities. The recent expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline serves as a practical case study of this phenomenon, enabling Canada to access markets with high demand for heavy crude oil. Academic collaborations between institutions such as the Harvard Kennedy School and the University of Toronto have further enriched the discourse on trade disputes. Their joint study on cross-border enforcement and policy innovation found that cooperative measures such as intelligence sharing and coordinated law enforcement efforts are far more effective in addressing issues like drug trafficking than unilateral actions. This research underscores the importance of bilateral and multilateral strategies in managing the complex challenges that arise during trade disputes. Moreover, data collected by the World Trade Organization provides empirical evidence of the long-term impacts of trade disputes. WTO reports have consistently shown that even temporary tariffs can lead to structural changes in global trade networks. Businesses often respond by relocating production facilities or diversifying their supplier base to avoid future tariff risks, a trend that has significant implications for both economic growth and international competitiveness. Lastly, ongoing analyses from both governmental agencies and independent research institutions indicate that while the immediate economic impacts of the 2025 tariffs are cause for concern, the full effects will depend on a range of factors, including global market trends, domestic policy responses, and broader geopolitical shifts. Continued monitoring and adaptive policy measures will be critical for both the United States and Canada to mitigate adverse outcomes and to harness opportunities for innovation and growth. In conclusion, the extensive body of research confirms that while trade tensions such as those between the United States and Canada pose significant short-term challenges, a well-coordinated research-based policy approach can help both nations navigate these disruptions. By leveraging insights from international institutions and academic studies, policymakers can work towards solutions that not only protect domestic interests, but also uphold the long-standing benefits of global economic integration.